Welcome to Nate's Haunted Hour, where the shadows come alive and the stories of the unknown take hold of your soul. Before we dive into tonight's terrors, make sure to like this video and hit that subscribe button, if you dare. Beware, dear listener, for once you enter, there's no turning back. So turn down the lights and prepare yourself for the fright of your life. You're in for an hour of chills, thrills, and tales that haunt the darkest corners of your mind. This is Nate's Haunted Hour. And don't forget, subscribing may just keep the spirits at bay. For now.
Grandmother. Part 1. The Summoning in the Storm. The winter of 1692 was unlike any the people of Massachusetts had seen before. The snow came early that year, and by December it had buried the land in a thick white sheet, isolating homes and villages under a suffocating silence. At the edge of the small, God-fearing village of Ashcroft stood the Hale family farm, a modest creaking house that now housed only 4: Sarah Hale, her younger sister Abigail, their brother Thomas, and their frail mother, Mary. The death of their grandmother, Lydia Hale, had shattered what was left of their once tight-knit family. She had been the glue that held them together, the wise matriarch who knew how to soothe their troubles and ward off the harsh realities of life in the wilderness. Her death was sudden and mysterious, happening only weeks before. A sickness had taken her, one that came swiftly in the night. She was gone before the family could do anything. But it wasn't just the loss of her comforting presence that weighed on them. Lydia had been the family's protector, not just from the harsh winters or the lurking animals of the woods, but from something far more insidious. In secret, she had dabbled in the old ways that Sarah and the others did not fully understand until after she passed. Now, with her gone, Sarah had discovered an old, weathered book hidden under floorboards in the barn. It was filled with cryptic symbols and incantations, words that spoke of bringing back the dead, of contacting spirits long past. Sarah had made a decision. Their grandmother had been too important to let go. They needed her guidance again, now more than ever. The air inside the house was cold and tense as the 3 remaining siblings gathered in the attic that night. The wind howled outside, but inside the flickering candles cast long shadows over their pale faces. "We shouldn't be doing this, Sarah," Thomas whispered, his voice trembling. He was the most devout of them all, always wary of sin, always fearful of God's judgment. "We don't have a choice," Sarah snapped, her eyes hollow from weeks of sleepless nights. "Mother's barely holding on. The snow has trapped us here, and we're alone. We need Grandmother. She knew things, Thomas, things that could help us." Abigail, her wide eyes darting nervously between her siblings, held the book tightly in her hands. "She said it would be dangerous," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "She told us never to meddle with the book." "But she's gone now," Sarah said firmly, "and without her, we're lost." The ritual began. Sarah recited the incantation from the book, her breath visible in the freezing attic air. The strange, archaic words slipped from her tongue, filling the room with a suffocating weight. The wind outside seemed to die down, replaced by an eerie silence. As Sarah spoke the final words, a gust of icy air swept through the room, extinguishing the candles. Then, from below, came a sound, soft, rhythmic knocking on the front door. It was impossible, given how deep the snow was piled against the house. No one should be able to reach the door. "Grandmother?" Abigail asked, her voice trembling. A familiar voice, gentle and kind, called from below. "Children, it's me. Let me in." Part 2. The Witch's Winter. The next morning the house was darker. Though the fire in the hearth burned as brightly as ever, a cold seemed to cling to the walls, as if the very house had become a tomb. The family tried to carry on with their daily chores, but there was a heaviness in the air. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. Whenever she turned around, she thought she saw movement at the edge of her vision, shadows that didn't belong to anything. Thomas refused to speak about the ritual, pretending as though nothing had happened, while Abigail would wake in the middle of the night, swearing she heard their grandmother's voice calling her from outside. 3 days passed, and on the fourth, Sarah found something strange. Near the edge of the property, she saw footprints in the snow. They were small, delicate, like those of an old woman, and they led away from the house, disappearing into the woods. But no one could survive out there in the cold for long. "Do you think it's really her?" Abigail asked nervously, standing beside her sister. "It has to be," Sarah replied, though her heart was heavy with doubt. "We called her, didn't we?" But something was wrong. Sarah knew it. The house felt too still, and the air inside had grown stale. That night, as the wind howled against the walls, Thomas was the first to feel the full brunt of what they had done. He had always been deeply religious, more so than the rest of the family. Since their father had died years earlier, he had taken it upon himself to uphold the family's faith. But that night, as he lay awake in his bed, he felt a presence near him, a cold breath on his neck. When he turned, he saw her, Grandmother Lydia, standing in the doorway. "Thomas," she whispered, "come with me." He wanted to believe it was truly her, but the shadows clung to her form, warping her features into something unnatural. Her eyes, once soft and comforting, were now dark, void-like. Against his better judgment, Thomas rose from his bed and followed her. She led him out of the house, barefoot, into the snow. By morning, his body was found in the barn, frozen solid. His face was contorted in a scream of pure terror, though there were no signs of struggle. Sarah found the book lying open beside his bed, the pages covered in frost. Part 3. The Cold Grip of Sin. The death of Thomas left the family in shambles. Their mother, already frail, retreated into herself, her mind unravelling with grief. She barely spoke, muttering prayers under her breath and clutching a rosary in her bony hands. Sarah, on the other hand, was consumed by guilt. She had led them into this. She had brought this evil into their home. "It's the devil's work," their mother whispered one night, her eyes wide and vacant. "He's come for us, for our sins. Lydia, she knew. She knew." The cold in the house seemed to intensify. The wind outside became relentless, battering the walls and rattling the windows. Abigail claimed to hear Grandmother's voice every night now, calling her, beckoning her to the woods. Sarah tried to convince herself it wasn't real, that it was all in their heads, but the signs were everywhere. Scratches appeared on the walls, as if something had clawed its way through the wood. Strange symbols began to etch themselves into the furniture, the same symbols Sarah had seen in the book. One evening, Sarah found Abigail standing by the well, her eyes glazed over, staring into the water. "I hear her, Sarah," Abigail said softly. "She's down there, waiting for me." Sarah grabbed her sister's arm and pulled her away from the well. "Abigail, stop it. This isn't her. It's something else. Something wrong. We shouldn't have done it." Abigail only smiled, a distant, vacant smile, before slipping away from Sarah's grip and walking back into the house. That night, Abigail was gone. They found her body the next morning, submerged in the icy well. Her face was frozen in terror, her lips twisted into a final scream that echoed in Sarah's mind, long after the snow had begun to cover the well again. Part 4. The Darkness Within. Now it was just Sarah and her mother, and the house was a prison. The wind outside seemed alive, howling like a beast ready to pounce. Inside, the shadows danced in the corners of the rooms, and the walls seemed to close in around them. Every night, Sarah would hear faint footsteps in the attic where they had performed the ritual, and she knew that whatever they had brought back was growing stronger. Her mother's condition worsened. She refused to leave her bed, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling, her mouth moving silently in prayer. "We were cursed," she muttered one evening. "Lydia tried to protect us. She tried—" Sarah demanded answers, but her mother's mind was too far gone. She wandered through the house like a ghost, muttering about the sins of the family. It was then that Sarah discovered the truth. In the barn, hidden beneath the same floorboards where she had found the book, was a letter. It was written in her grandmother's hand, addressed to Sarah's mother. The letter spoke of a dark history, a curse that had plagued their family for generations. Lydia had been the one to keep it at bay, using the old ways, the forbidden magic, to protect them. But in her final days, the sickness had taken her too quickly, and she had not been able to pass on the knowledge of how to stop it. The entity had been waiting, and Sarah had set it free. Part 5. The Devil's Touch. The church had long been suspicious of the Hale family. Father Matthias, the village priest, had noticed their absence from the services, the strange whispers that followed them wherever they went. But the winter had made it difficult to investigate. The snow had piled too high, the roads too treacherous. Still, the rumours persisted, and soon enough, he decided to act. Inside the Hale house, Sarah's world was falling apart. Her mother had become catatonic, staring blankly at the walls, her fingers twitching as if possessed by some unseen force. The entity, the thing that had once worn her grandmother's face, now roamed the house openly at night. Sarah could hear it moving through the halls, whispering to her, calling her name. One evening, as Sarah sat by the fire, the flames flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. She heard the soft shuffle of footsteps behind her. Turning slowly, she saw it. Grandmother Lydia, standing in the doorway, her face twisted and decayed, her eyes hollow black pits. "You brought me back," the thing hissed, its voice like the wind through dead trees. "Now you'll all pay." Part 6. The Witch Unmasked. Sarah ran, her heart pounding in her chest, the cold air biting at her skin. She stumbled through the house, her breath visible in the freezing air. The walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own, the shadows stretching and twisting into monstrous shapes. In the attic, Sarah frantically searched through the book, hoping to find some way to undo what she had done. But the pages had changed. The once clear incantations were now a chaotic jumble of symbols and drawings of her family twisted and broken, their faces contorted in agony. "You can't stop it," a voice whispered from behind her. Sarah turned to see the entity standing in the corner, its grotesque form barely recognizable as human. "This has been your fate all along," it said, stepping closer. "Your family has always been mine. I was bound by your ancestors, but now I am free." Part 7. The Flames of Judgment. The next morning, Father Matthias arrived at the Hale farm with a group of villagers. The house stood silent, the snow around it undisturbed. As they approached, the smell of rot filled the air, and an uneasy feeling settled over them. Inside, they found the bodies. Sarah's mother lay in her bed, her face twisted in horror, her skin blackened as if touched by fire. Abigail's body was submerged in the well, her fingers frozen in a claw-like grasp. Thomas still in the barn, his mouth agape in a silent scream, but Sarah was nowhere to be found. As Father Matthias searched the house, he found the attic door open. Climbing the creaking stairs, he found the book, its pages charred and smouldering. And there, standing in the corner, was the thing that had once been Lydia Hale. It smiled, its decayed lips peeling back to reveal blackened teeth. "You're too late, Father," it whispered. "They're all mine." Part 8. The Devil's Claim. In a final act of desperation, Father Matthias attempted an exorcism, chanting prayers and waving a crucifix before him. But the entity only laughed, its voice echoing through the walls. The house began to tremble, the walls cracking and splintering as if something beneath the earth was trying to rise. "You think your God can stop me?" it hissed, its voice growing deeper, more monstrous. "This place belongs to me now." The house began to collapse in on itself, the walls warping and bending as though the structure itself were alive. Father Matthias was thrown to the ground as the entity's laughter filled the air. He barely managed to crawl out of the house before it was consumed by flames, the fire roaring up into the night sky. As he stood in the snow, watching the house burn, Father Matthias heard a voice, a faint whisper carried on the wind. It was Sarah's voice, soft and distant, calling from the flames. "Help me," But it was too late. The house was gone, and with it, the Hale family had been claimed by the darkness they had unleashed.